Hey guys, I'm learning TFT, and I'm going to share my learnings with you so that I can learn more effectively and you can learn as well. In this video, I'm going to go through how to itemize every carry in set 14. I'm going to go in detail into a tier list for every unit based off of PvE stats, which are going to be taken with a grain of salt, but I'm combining the stats with kind of some intuition as well as how their spells and traits work to figure out what will likely be a good way to itemize every unit in the game. And that hopefully won't change too much as the set progresses. I'm going to cover AD, AP, and melee. I won't be covering tanks because tanks are generally more generic, though there are some nuances depending on the trait types. But also for like 3-star tanks, for example, their itemization is going to be more specific. And right now there's no explorer available in the stat sites to grab that data. So that might be something I pull together later. So I've broken down high level which are kind of like AD Shojin caster users versus Rageblade, blue buff versus Shojin, AD versus AP melee, and we'll walk through kind of the analysis as well as why these units work the way that they do around the itemization, which should help us get a better idea of how those units work, what they need to succeed, and then so it'll give us a better understanding of the whole set, the units. And as a follow-up video down the line soon, I will plan to put together a positioning video as well. So again, a lot of the underlying purpose of this analysis is not to say we're going to create BIS items on every unit, but rather to be able to give us a better understanding of how the units of this set work, what their strengths are, how flexible you can flex between different units. And in general, from just a fundamental TFT standpoint, you do want to be slamming items as early as you can. Especially we saw last set with set 13, lost streak early was not a very viable strategy. So just figuring out how to play strongest board across the whole game, especially starting in stage 2, is extremely important. And so being able to slam items and then knowing what lines are available to you down certain paths is extremely useful, as opposed to saying, oh, I'm going to hard focus on this one comp and only play that comp, right? So as an example, if you can say, oh, I have a Shojin slam early, well, you have all of these units available to you, all of these AP units available to you, and so you kind of have narrowed down your tree of options, like you've eliminated the melee options. Or let's say you slam an early Rageblade, well, now you know, okay, these are the narrowed down range of options, like kind of like if you think about poker, like what are the hand ranges that someone might have best based off of their betting strategies. When you slam an item, you kind of narrow down your possible options into a range of units and comps. And so this whole analysis is designed to give us a better understanding of what your ranges are based off of what item slams you have. So before we do that, I'm going to go into the meta mindset of the day. For those of you who are new, these meta mindsets are kind of like a psychology philosophy analysis that is designed to be very useful to help you get better at TFT when you're thinking about the big picture strategy-wise. How do you get better over the long run? Not just how do you get better at this specific thing right now that's hot in this patch, but that will no longer be relevant to you in a month or two or even a year from now. And so the meta mindset's designed to be useful if your goal is to learn TFT, to be able to get better every single day, have a process, and enjoy the game more, frankly. This is the section for you. It'll also help you as an analogy and metaphor for life. I always try to connect these to life as well. So if you are not interested in the meta mindset, I would highly suggest that you take a look at the timestamps in the description below, where you can jump straight into the itemization analysis. So today's meta mindset of the day is going to be modern intelligence equals strategic ignorance. So we'll talk about what that means. You can see here, there's an image of a guy just surrounded by an influx of information and data, and he is intentionally blindfolded and ignorant of a lot of the information that's flowing his way. And this is relevant to TFT in the sense that you can definitely see, especially at the start of a new set, there is seemingly an infinite amount of information coming at you from a million different directions. You're trying to figure out, well, okay, what is the new mechanic? What are the units? How do they operate? How do you itemize? What are the new augments? What are encounters? There's just so much stuff flowing at you, and it can be really overwhelming to figure out what do you focus on. There's so much content out there, especially at the start of a new set. And so the first big idea related to this is there is an overabundance of information in the world. And so this is more generally true that Herbert Simon said, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention and a need to allocate that attention efficiently among the overabundance of information sources that might consume it. Nate Silver along those lines said that the human brain is quite remarkable. It can store perhaps 3 terabytes of information. And yet that is only about 1/1,000,000th of the information that IBM says is now produced in the world each day. And this, I think Nate Silver wrote this book like a decade ago. So it's probably significantly, smaller percentage than even that. So we have to be terribly selective about the information we choose to remember. So connecting these ideas is that there's the amount of information produced in the world today is rapidly accelerating and increasing, especially with AI. And in the future, there's probably AI-produced content that's just flooding you, right? Like if you think about TikTok or YouTube, there's just so many more videos and content available to you. And so that creates a scarcity in your attention. And so it becomes extremely important how you allocate your attention. If you are just, if you think about this guy and a million things coming his way, if you're just not being selective and just accepting whatever, next YouTube video is recommended to you, the next video on TikTok, whatever information notifications that you get on your phone, and you're just pulled in a million directions without being intentional about how you selectively choose to allocate your attention, you're just going to be overwhelmed and over-flooded all the time. E.O. Wilson, in his book Consilience, said, "We are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. The world in the future will be run by synthesizers, people able to put together the right information at the right time, think critically about it, and make important choices wisely." So again, it's talking about this big idea of how to both be selective about your attention with the information that you consume, but also how to trust the right people who are synthesizing information for you so that they can also serve as a filter for you. So part of this is like thinking about, for example, which streams to watch. The people that are the top streamers in TFT, which streamers you choose to watch can significantly impact the kind of information that you are consuming. Same thing with YouTube, like which content creators you choose to watch affects how you value the information that's coming your way, what information you will receive, and whether you're receiving the right information that will help you over the longer term and that will meet the goals that you are trying to achieve. So if entertainment is the main reason that you are watching, then that can be your filter, right? But if your goal, I suspect that many of you who are watching this specific video, if your goal is to get better at TFT and to learn TFT more effectively, then figuring out how to eliminate the noise around just consuming TFT content solely for entertainment versus figuring out which content creators and synthesizers are going to help you accomplish that goal and giving you very high signal content that's designed to help you improve, not just feel entertained. Cal Newport, in his book Digital Minimalism, said, extracting eyeball minutes, the key resource for companies like Google and Facebook, has become significantly more lucrative than extracting oil. So when you think about the top 10 richest companies in the world, the highest market cap, they're pretty much all internet tech companies now. And the primary way that most of them generate revenue is by eyeballs. Now, some of that is shifting. In the last 10 to 20 years, the main way that tech companies made money was through advertising, which is still generally true. If you think about television, that is still definitely true as well. And so when you think about YouTube, their algorithm, how do they keep as many people on the platform for as long as possible? How do they get you to keep watching over and over the next video? It's all about how do they basically plug you into the matrix and get your dopamine hitting over and over again, right? And so they don't really care about what your goals are. They just care that you're plugged into the matrix and that you're not going to unplug. So you have to be very intentional about, what you allow in to your brain. Yuval Noah Harari said, in the past, censorship worked by blocking the flow of information. And so that was burning books, for example. In the 21st century, censorship works by flooding people with irrelevant information. You could see this with the whole stuff with Donald Trump, fake news, right? That whole idea of fake news, and arguably he was inventing the idea of fake news in his last previous elections, but he was probably contributing to a ton of it too. And this is the warfare of the 21st century. It's not blocking information. It's just sending you so much information that you have no idea what to do with it because your brain is completely overwhelmed and unable to then process what is true and what is false, what is signal and what is noise. All right, so that leads us to the idea of ignorance, the idea of blocking stuff out, of having to, because you're flooded with irrelevant information, and that's the way that censorship works. It's if there is, it's kind of like in law movies where someone has some incriminating evidence, and so they have to provide the other side with that information. But what they do is, instead of just sending that incriminating evidence, they send the other lawyers a flood of information, tons and tons of boxes. And you see this in movies where they have to have a whole team of people to go through 1,000 boxes of stacks of papers that's not sorted, not structured, to figure out how to make sense of that information, right? And so a big part of this is ignorance. Nassim Taleb said, they think that intelligence is about noticing things that are relevant, detecting patterns. In a complex world, intelligence consists in ignoring things that are irrelevant, avoiding false patterns. This is also true in TFT, where you can oftentimes see something that goes viral on Reddit, on Twitter. You got to figure out what's a false pattern versus what's real. Even Dish Soap in Don't Talk If You Don't Know, he talked about how he released his video on learnings for regionals, and he played a ton of reroll there, but there was a small patch before Worlds, and he figured out that the meta would shift towards kind of more of a AP Flex Fast 8 angle, but because he was intentionally kind of incepting in his opponent's minds that reroll was strong, he found that he got an edge that way by introducing this false pattern into the world, right? This idea of censorship through flooding people with irrelevant information. Like that is the new warfare of the 21st century. And like props to Dish Soap. Like he's operating at like a completely different level than most other players, right? Like not only is he figuring out how to play the game, he is playing this meta game. Like he has mastered the meta mindset and he is contributing to the overabundance of irrelevant information, right? So if you want to be able to play TFT well, if you want to be able to figure out life well, especially as content, information, data is proliferating at increasingly and accelerating rates, this is one of the most important skills that you can learn in life and in TFT. Yuval Noah Harari also said, in ancient times, having power meant having access to data. Today, having power means knowing what to ignore. So some of the most powerful people in the world, they have extremely tight filters around who has access to them, what information they will allow into their brains, right? So like, I'm very specific about basically disabling all notifications of apps on my phone. I never answer calls. Like the amount of like spam mail, text messages, calls I get now is like increasing. I don't know why. It's like, it seems like in the last 6 months, it's gone up so much. And you see like older generation, like my parents' generation, like these are like, you know, people in their 70s consistently get tricked by telemarketers or, you know, people that are trying to con them in some way. And that's just going to continue to improve happening more and more. So knowing what to ignore is actually the most simplest way that you can increase your personal power. Yuval Noah Harari also said in 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, in such a world, the last thing a teacher needs to give her students is more information. They already have too much of it. So this speaks to the way our educational system is set up. And I've talked about this a little bit before. I think most of our schooling system is very outdated. You're put in front of a teacher, the teacher spits information at you, you're supposed to passively consume it, memorize it, regurgitate it, and you're graded by whether you memorize that correctly or not, right? Like, that's an outdated model of learning. Not only does AI, ChatGPT, can memorize stuff way better than you, so humans aren't needed in the loop to memorize stuff. It's far more important to know what are the right questions to ask and how to make sense of that information, and more importantly, be selective about the information that you reject. Yuval further says, instead, people need the ability to make sense of information, to tell the difference between what is important and what is unimportant, and above all, to combine many bits of information into a broad picture of the world. So this is just as true in TFT, where you got to figure out like what information is relevant, and not just passively consume it either, because if you're just watching these videos, goes in one ear, out the other, like it's like eating empty calories, right? Like if you want nutritious food, you got to be intentional about what you eat, because fast food is everywhere. And if you want nutritious information and data, you got to be intentional about the information that you consume, because there's empty calories of information everywhere you go. Like the world is flooded with it and is continuing to be more and more flooded with it. Daniel Goleman and Richard Davidson said, our society suffers from an attention deficit. Today's children grow up with a digital device at hand continuously, and those devices offer constant distractions and a larger stream of information than for any generation in the past. So we consider boosting attention skills to be nothing short of an urgent public health need. So same idea. Especially in the digital age, if you grew up at a very young age with a phone, an iPad in your hand, like this is an experiment that the humankind, like mankind, has never seen before. The amount of distraction and difficulty for young 20s teenagers to focus is extremely challenging. And you see like more and more people today are being diagnosed with ADHD. And I feel like that, to me, is not really useful, because so much of what we're doing to people's brains is being caused by the technology that we are introducing into the world, and not just like, oh, you have this condition. Like, well, society has played a huge part in that, right? And so we got to figure out, how do we combat that? Confucius, this is a guy that lived more than 2,000 years ago, said, not to discuss with a man worthy of conversation is to waste the man. To discuss with a man not worthy of conversation is to waste words. The wise waste neither men nor words. So we can like kind of extend this idea to content that you come across, like a streamer that you are watching, or maybe you are engaging with, you're chatting in their stream. Whether you're watching a YouTube video, if you're engaging in the comments of a YouTube video, right? It's extremely important, more than ever, to be very intentional about who you are interacting with, and who you are listening with, and who you are speaking to. In the digital world, there's an infinite number of people, basically, that you could be engaging with. And the path of your life, this is like the idea that, you are basically the outcome of the 5 closest people you are in the world, because who you spend your time with shapes so much of how you see the world and the kind of person you become. And that is just as true as the types of content that you consume, the types of people that you listen to, engage with in the digital world, as it is in the physical world. And so one way to approach this is the Lindy effect, which basically says older is better. According to ChatGPT, it says the Lindy effect is a concept that suggests that the longer something has existed, the longer it is likely to continue existing. This idea was originally applied to books, technologies, or ideas, and basically it's the idea that durability is a sign of staying power. Another way of saying this is that the longer something has existed, the more valuable it is, because it's social proof. Whereas something that has lost its value will disappear because there's no reason for it to continue staying around. Like, for example, if you look at Twitter, a lot of the content that you consume on Twitter doesn't have staying power because it's news, right? And news has its own purpose, but it's very perishable. It's information that is perishable, versus if what you care about is how to learn long term, you got to figure out how to consume information that is non-perishable. And so a big way of doing that is to focus on how long something has existed. And a big idea with TFT is that non-perishable stuff is fundamentals. How do you look at the game that is agnostic to patch stuff, from set to set stuff? How do you perceive the game at a tactical and strategic level that helps you better understanding and make decisions that is not perishable, that is not dependent on the patch or set? So the idea is that for the perishable, every additional day in its life translates into a shorter additional life expectancy. Whereas for the non-perishable, every additional day implies a longer life expectancy. So this was originally applied to books. If a book's been in print for 40 years, I can expect it to be in print for another 40 years. So when I was like, there was a point like 5 years ago that I was reading something like 200 to 300 books a year. And I was very intentional about how I chose to pick those books. I very rarely pick books that have been written in the last 10 years, because you don't know how perishable or non-perishable it is yet. But if you're reading a book that's 100 years old, you can have a very high confidence that it is still useful. And if you think about the most non-perishable books, religious texts, like, although the modern world has rejected much of the religious ideas of these texts, I think what is not really that disputable is that underneath these religious texts, and Joseph Campbell has talked about this, that he would argue that there's an abstract layer or a fundamental morality or way or value system that connects all of these different religions, and why these religious texts are still read so often today is that it speaks to something fundamental to the human condition. And so I think you can apply this idea to TFT that ideally, and this is the kind of content that I'm trying to shift towards figuring out how to focus on more and create more, because I find it's more useful for me and hopefully more useful to you. Ideally, we can figure out how do we consume information and more so even like filter and find information that is non-perishable. You know, what I love about TFT is it's such a good metaphor for life, because so much information about TFT is constantly changing. And so the way that you can figure out how to consume information in a very intelligent, modern way, right? Modern intelligence is strategic ignorance. How do you approach the overabundance of information? And that is just as true in TFT, to focus on what is important, to be ignorant of what is unimportant, to be selective of what is. And again, Lindy effect is one way to approach this. And with TFT, it's like, how do you go back to the fundamentals? How do you abstract your learnings away from any specific patch or set to get to the like deeper truth, right? It's like kind of like when Neo in the Matrix sees all the ones and zeros like flowing down, and like you can like hack into a deeper sense of reality, right? Like that's what dish soap is able to do so well, like get under all the noise, right? And to get at what is truth, basically. So I hope that this meta mindset is useful for you. I hope you're able to apply it to how you consume information for TFT, how you consume information for life in general. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the meta mindset around this idea of modern intelligence equals strategic ignorance. And so with that said, I'm going to dive into the topic of this video, how to itemize every carry in set 14. And so along the lines of the meta mindset, my goal here is to focus on the fundamentals. I'm going to go into kind of like, how does each unit's spell work and maybe their traits, and how does that connect to how you think about itemizing them. Now keep in mind, this is day 3 of PBE, or day 4, I forget. And so Riot could still like change how some of their spells work, the numbers, but fundamentally, I think for the most part, unless they drastically rework a champion, which like they usually do like to 1 or 2 champions across the set, but for the most part, it's not going to change that much. And it's also useful to think about how the traits and unit spells relate to previous units and traits from previous sets, so that again you have this idea of an analog that you can draw and learn from around what worked in the past and why. And so again, the goal here is to help you learn how to fish so that you can learn how to make this analysis work for yourself without me even having to do it for you in the future. I mean, for me in the past, I would listen to other top players, and now I can do a lot of this analysis, and I'm still continuing to learn. So I would also love your feedback in the process as I do this video. Anything that I got wrong, any feedback, any questions, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments as well. All right, so let's get started with Kindred. See if you can see this. Okay, so Kindred. Oh, and by the way that I figured out these tier lists is I went to meta TFT units list, and let's say with Kindred, it was a combination of looking at the build, because if you just look at items and low frequency, you'll see like some items, like Guardbreaker, for example, is very common in this. Though I think there's a bunch of caveats in a lot of this analysis, right? Like Guardbreaker, I suspect, is much better in this set because you have the trait Vanguard, which is a shielding trait, which we didn't have for set 13. And so especially if the meta is heavily leaning towards Vanguard. Like Guardbreaker will be just generally better. But if you see items that don't appear in the most common, like frequently built, like 3 items, but it's like high average place and place change in the specific items list, that could just be because of small sample size. It could be because the players are picking up that item in late game carousel and they're a secondary carry. So a lot of this analysis, especially for units that are not the primary carry, is not as valuable. And so that's why part of this analysis was me combining, like I would prioritize items that show up very commonly here, like IE, for example, shows up very frequently, even though IE as an average placement might be higher than like Deathblade, for example, right? But I would prioritize IE over Deathblade for that reason. And you kind of have to think about like what is the average placement of Kindred, 4.6 without IE, but with Deathblade, right? But because his frequency is built so much with IE, like it would negatively impact Kindred to not have IE. And Asa did like some math to like kind of prove that point. And I forgot the exact math, but the general idea is that the frequency of which an item is built, it needs to be accounted for, and not just like, oh, Guardbreaker's at 3.97 here, but low frequency. So I combined that analysis into this tier list. So this includes 3 item builds, includes single item analysis, it includes an understanding of how the traits work, how their ability works, and then also whether they are rerolled or not. Because like, for example, I believe for Morgana, like if we look at Morgana, where's Morgana? Like a lot of what performs best for her is utility, like Static Shiv and Morello. But that's because she's being used as a secondary carry. And right now, what my intent with all of these analysis for all of these units is if they are your primary carry. So if at some point in the set, Morgana reroll is actually good, which right now in PvE, or at least so far, she has not been, that would drastically change, the items that would appear here. So even though like Blue Buff and JG right now in the stats are not good, they're significantly worse than Static Shiv. That does not mean if you were going to reroll Morgana that you would want to build primarily Static Shiv and Morello. Like right now, the fact that these are bad is an indication that Morgana reroll is bad. Not that these are better items to put on her if you hit a 3-star Morgana. So I'm accounting for all of that when I put together these tier lists. All right, so Kindred. Basically, Kindred is a attack caster. She gets attack speed from rapid fire, AD from marksman. So she just wants to cast more, and the way you do that is Shojin. So Shojin's really good. You want to be able to have her spell crit. I think is Kindred a girl? Well, I don't know. I just use gender neutral. Shojin IE Last Whisper is very commonly built. If you have an IE, then it makes glove items more valuable. So that's why Guardbreaker, if you have an IE, is very good. The overkill bounces to the nearest enemy. I suspect that's why Gold Collector is really good, especially if you have it with IE. If you can kill, burst down your primary target and then overkill to your next target with Gold Collector, you can generate a lot of gold. I suspect that's also why Sniper's Focus can be good, and Fishbones, because if she can ult like a backline unit and then have the overkill bounce, that can be very good as well. And Blue Buff actually showed up decently on the stats, but Shojin's better. And Blue Buff actually provides like some AD as well, 15 AD. And so the fact that these tier generation items are just indicate that she really wants to cast more. So you can think about like Kaisa from that Ink Shadow set. I think it was like 2 or 3 sets ago. There are a lot more AD casters in this set than set 13. All right, next we have Kogmaw, which is the opposite, right? Like, so we have a lot of AD casters and Rageblade users. And so another thing to think about is that basically Kindred and Kogmaw are going to be your early game holders, which at some point in the set, or maybe even right now, you can reroll them, right? But if you're contested or you just don't have that many units of them, you can slam these items and then you work your way down this tree of the unit costs. And by the way, I put these in the middle because while they're slightly better with Shojin or Rageblade here, they don't stand out as much as the ones on the sides. So these units could use these items, but are okay without them, whereas the units on the sides are significantly better with those items. All right, so Kogmaw gains a burst of attack speed with his spell. So anytime you have a spell that bursts attack speed, like Twitch from set 13, they're going to benefit from Rageblade a lot because they will get way more stacks really quickly during that period. Not only that, but he's a rapid fire, which again, like boosts attack speed over time. So Kogmaw, just like in most previous sets, is a Rageblade users because of this trait and the way his spell works, gaining attack speed, and he could get towards like a 5.0 attack speed pretty quickly. And so because he has attack speed built into his kit and his spell scales with AD, that's why Deathblade's strong. But also Runon's, like he's probably a good category 5 holder because he's attacking so much, then he can hit the other bolt with Runon's very well. So Sniper's Focus, Wit's End, very good for any high attack speed users. Fishbones, because he's attacking so much, can basically snipe down an enemy backliner, and these Radiants are all good. So for auto attack users, IE is not as good. This is kind of like Draven from last set, because his ability isn't like an attack caster like Kindred's, right? Like this deals a large amount of physical AD as the spell, but for Kogmaw, most of it is like increasing attack speed, and attacks deal more bonus damage. So basic auto attacks like Draven from set 13 can already crit, so you don't really need crit. It's actually more valuable to build these. All right, so Jhin is like Kindred, an attack caster, gains more value from casting than from auto attacking. Right, basic idea here is that these Rageblade holders, a lot of the damage output from their kit is going to be from auto attacking, whereas these casters, likely the majority of their damage is going to be from their ability, whereas for these Rageblade holders, the vast majority of their damage is from auto attacking. And the ones in the middle are more likely to be hybrid. So for Jhin, Marksman gives more AD, Exotech could give him an item, and then Dynamo helps with mana. So again, he's an attack caster and throws a bouncing grenade, which can hit AoE. So one thing to keep in mind for these units too is if they have AoE into their kit, then it makes red buff and Morello more valuable. He also 20% Sunder, so Last Whisper is a little bit less valuable for him, but that's why red buff is extremely good. And anytime you have most of the time, if you have an AD attack caster with Shojin, IE is also going to be good. We saw this with Xayah from a few sets ago. Because you want their spell to be able to crit, because that's where they're going to deal a lot of their damage. And in that case, Last Whisper is generally still good because it's a glove component, and glove components help you crit even more. So that's why Guardbreaker is also good. You'll note here that Rageblade is specifically bad for Jhin. Runon's in general is good across a lot of these units, even if they're not Rageblade holders, and I suspect that's just because Category 5 is really strong, and there are so many AD units. But keep in mind also that there are a lot of Shojin AD units and Shojin AP units this set, so you can really easily flex between the two more than you could in the past. All right, so that's Jhin. Next we have Vayne. So Vayne is Anima Squad Slayer. Slayer gives him healing. Anima Squad gives, I forget what Anima Squad gives. Damage amp. So damage amp is going to be a little bit less useful. So you have GS and Guardbreaker here. He does get healing, and his spell rapidly fire 3 attacks. First 2 deal bonus true damage. So Runons actually works really well with Vayne because he fires these 3 attacks. I suspect that they should also proc the Runon bolts. So Vayne should be a really good category 5 holder. You want to be these attacks to be able to crit. And so Rage Blade, i.e. Runons, is going to be really good on him. Yeah, like generally these are just the more generic AD items. But for I don't know if these 3 attacks crit normally, and so that might be why IE is also really valuable on Vayne. All right, next we have Draven. Draven is a Cypher, the Fortune-like trait, and Rapid Fire, which gives attack speed. Hurls 2 massive axes at the most enemies in a line, dealing a bunch of AD, and damage is reduced for each enemy hit. And he has a very high mana cost. Usually with high mana cost units, assuming that they're actually good at any time, which again, these you would only really play these units if they're strong in the meta at any time, right? But if Draven's good at some point, they buff his stats here enough, then the fact that he has high mana already tells you Shojin's going to be better than Rageblade. So you want his spell to be able to crit. Shojin, i.e. Last Whisper, very generic kind of AD caster. But because he has an AoE hits in a line, red buff can be good. Sniper's Focus is also interesting because he hits in a line and I believe it keeps going. And it at the most enemies in a line. So Sniper's Focus allows him to hit a bunch of enemies farther away, so he gets more value from Sniper's Focus. All right, Jinx. Street Demon, Marksman. Marksman has AD that scales over time. And Street Demon, I forget. HP, AP, AD. Okay, so basically Jinx gets a lot more AD from her traits. And then when she casts, gets 5 rockets that at random enemies within 2 hexes. So she has like an AoE effect. And the particular thing of note is that each cast fires an additional rocket. So this is like set 13 Heimer, where she will scale over the course of the fight, which means she just wants to cast a lot. That's why she wants Shojin. She wants to be able to crit when she fires those rockets, and Last Whisperer are good. Fish Bones can let her be able to snipe an enemy backline. Mana Zane's really good because of this scaling effect, even though she's AD. You normally think Mana Zane would go on an AP user, but Mana Zane's good for that reason. Radiant Shojin, also very good. And I'm not sure if when she fires a rocket, if it procs Runon, but that might be why Runon shows up well in the stats here. And then even Radiant Blue Buff had really good stats. And so the sample size on this is small, but this is something I would keep an eye on as well. But regular Blue Buff as well is good. And Gold Collector is solid because she's hitting a bunch of other units. So if some other unit got low, she would just be able to execute them as well. All right, so I wonder if also there's a world where Shojin Blue Buff combined is good. I doubt it, but that would be something to keep an eye on in the stats. All right, Senna is a Divinicore Slayer. She'll get a bunch of extra stats and some healing. And Senna hits enemies adjacent and fires 2 hexes beyond, so it has an AoE effect. Right now, the stats basically indicate they're a utility trait bot, and I couldn't really differentiate that much, so I would not eye this too much. I suspect because of the high mana cost that Senna's going to be more of a Shojin user than a Rageblade user, though right now Rageblade shows up better in the stats. So I would just take Senna's data right now with a grain of salt. If there is a patch where Senna becomes dominant in the meta, then I would revisit this. All right, Misfortune Syndicate gives the Kingpin bonus if you have the Kingpin on her, fires more waves, and Dynamo gives her more mana. Very high mana cost, so she wants to cast. This is where the vast majority of her damage comes from, which is why Shojin is, you basically need Shojin on her for her to work. And hits biggest clump, so red buff is likely also good for that reason. So you can see Shojin, you want her spell to crit because so much of her damage output is through her spell. You really want that amplifier. And then Last Whisper, because she's also hitting AoE, Last Whisper is extremely useful and gets that amplifying glove effect once you are able to crit to get more crit chance. Red buff also very good. If you have Radiant LW, has a very high crit level, you do need IE paired with that for that to be effective. Same with Radiant Guardbreaker. All right. Xayah. Xayah is an attack caster, so wants Shojin. Impales 6 feathers, and then when target dies, will deal more damage to other enemies within 2 hexes. So somewhat of an AoE effect, but want Shojin, IE, Last Whisper, Deathblade, Guardbreaker good. She gets AD, I think, from these, so I suspect Deathblade isn't as great. But yeah, Gold Collector, because she's hitting like a bunch of other units, could be useful. Mana Zane, she wants to cast a lot. Radiant of these are all good. All right, Zeri, Exotech Rapid Fire, gains attack speed from this. Exotech items that are good are Flux Capacitator, attack store charges, and then next attack consumes charges. Basically, this is custom built for Zeri because the more you attack, the more damage the Flux Capacitator deals. And Pulse Stabilizer executes and increases AD and crit chance, so it's just good stats on her. So these are going to be the best Exo Tech items. And the way she works is she dashes and then creates like a echo, like a copy clone that lingers and continues to deal damage. But Zeri, like most other sets, is a very heavy Rageblade reliant user. And usually with Rageblade, especially with the way Zeri set up in her kit, Rageblade users want to have the fight scale and last a long time so that they can scale up. And Gunblade helps with that purpose. So yeah, so double Rageblade Gunblade could be good. Rageblade IE Gunblade. This is pretty much the same build as Zeri from set 13. And Syndicate Zeri gets a lot more stats, and I believe pairs with Twisted Fate as Rapid Fire, I think. Might have that wrong. But yeah, Zeri's pretty much the same as Reprint. Aphelios is also a attack speed unit. And can't really tell that by the spell, but yeah, like a lot of his kit is with the attack speed. Marksman gives him more AD. Golden Ox gives him damage amp. So Rageblade, he is kind of a hybrid in that his spell does deal damage, but he deals more damage from his auto attacks. So some IE, but also that's why he's more flexible. Like Gunblade's also here for the same reason for Zeri. And his Moonblast hits a large group of enemies, so that's why red buff is also good on him. And anytime you have Rageblade, Runons is also going to be good. Same with, I believe, Zeri. Actually, not for Zeri, because Zeri just wants to really focus on attack speed, whereas Aphelios is kind of more hybrid, so the Runons can can be good as well. All right, Samira is a street demon amp. Amp increases the number of bullets that she fires, which she fires a ton of bullets when she casts. And street demon gives, I think it was damage amp? No, 80 AP. And so because she like dashes towards the target, she like dives into the middle of the fray and hits a bunch of units around within 3 hexes and shreds them, and then dashes back to safety after. She also has Omnivamp, but because she like goes into the middle and doesn't stay in safety, that's why Hodge and Edge of Night actually show up in the stats, and maybe even QSS so that she's not stunned there. Just adds survivability. But she wants to be able to crit because a lot of her damage comes from that spell. And so having like just a lot of glove items seems to be the main way that she can be most effective. And Radiant Shojin is extremely strong, just lets her cast a lot more. All right, Urgot. So Urgot already, and this is true for Executioners. Executioners give crit chance and allows their spell to crit. Anytime you have an Executioner, it's usually not worth building IE or Jewel Gauntlet on them, because a lot of the power budget of those items of IE and Jewel Gauntlet is in being able to make the spell crit. And so it's actually better to build the other glove components to get more stats from other areas. Boombot's scale is like Automata, scales with amount of damage dealt. And his spell is pretty, like, it's good, but it's also not like too much on the caster side. It's kind of a hybrid, right? Because the spell increases attack speed, which normally would be good for increasing Rageblade stacks, but also deals a good amount of damage with rockets. So that's why Shojin and Rageblade are like kind of in the middle here, which is why I had, Urgot in the middle. But just more glove items in general and more AD, because you already have crit. And Radiant Hodge is particularly good on him and Shojin. All right, so that covers the AD users. Next, we have the AP users. And AP you want to split between blue buff holders and Shojin holders. There's a lot more Shojin holders than AP holders, but I want to call out that compared to last set, where at the 4-cost level, it was only Heimer, there are now 2 4-cost AP blue buff holders, which makes blue buff much more slammable than in last set. But again, Shojin is just so flexible, right? You can extend that into Aurora in the late game to cap out, and you can also flex with AD here. So AD is like, Rageblade is much more narrow, blue buff is much more narrow, but Shojin is extremely flexible this set. Because in large part, I think because there's so many AD casters. Whereas last set, there wasn't as much. Okay, so Morgana is a Divinicore Dynamo. Dynamo is like Invoker, gives mana. And Divinicore is like Heavenly or Guild. And this is basically a reprint, so she just wants the same items basically as set 13. So blue buff, Gunblade. She spreads anti-heal really well, very good with Blighting Jewel. Seraphine is a techie, which is like sorcerers from set 13. Anima Squad, which gives just regular stats again. AP, oh, damage amp. Anima Squad gives damage amp. Okay, so right now the stats are kind of skewed for Seraphine. Likely because reroll for her is not very common. But she does fire a sound wave through targets, so similar to this the KDA set. So that's why Morello and Red Buff are good on her. And even if she's a carry, Static Shiv is not bad because you want to shred the backliners. And so a 3-star Seraphine that can possibly burst down a backliner can be really strong. So building like Rabadon or JG Guardbreaker to burst down the enemy can be really good. Right, Zyra, Street Demon Techie. This is basically a reprint. She gets a stun and then sends a smaller Vine at another target. So she hits like kind of 2 units. So Morello and Red Buff are like okay, not great. But she just wants to cast more. And her mana is 60, so like Nashor's is like okay. But you just want more damage on her. Most of these attack casters are pretty similar. Strategist gives damage amp. And LeBlanc is very similar to Timer last set. Similar to Jinx as well, where she gets scaling the number of sigils. And so she wants a long fight, which means you want a strong front line, but you definitely want mana items. I'm not sure if it's like building double mana could be even better, like Shojin blue buff, like Ari from that one set three sets ago, or I forget. But because you have scaling, you also Gunblade can be really useful because then she can like 1v like 3 or 4 different units at the end. And Nashor just helps her like generate more mana. Right, Veigar. Veigar has a 60 mana. Actually, I wasn't sure why for the stats. Usually, blue buff is for like 30 or 40 mana users. And I actually need to update this. Put Veigar in the middle here. But yeah, Veigar shows up better with blue buff. Let me just do that. So if you know why that's the case, I would be very interested. Definitely include a comment if you have hypotheses on why that's true. And a timestamp is also useful just so people know to reference this part of the video. Oops, not this one. All right, let me fix this. Okay. All right, so with Veigar, his Techie gives him AP. Cyber Boss makes his final form deal magic damage to adjacent enemies, so he has some AoE. So you definitely want to position him to like hit units in a clump, which makes solo frontline more valuable. But you just want more bursts, so blue buff JG Guardbreaker is very good. Nashor help him cast more. He's very strong with a lot of artifacts and radiant items. And his spell rewards reroll, right? If he's at higher star level than the target, he deals 33% true damage. So that's also why I think radiant and artifacts are much better for him. And he could burst down a lot of enemies with Mana Zane. Yuumi has scaling damage since she permanently marks items or marks targets and deals more damage if they're already marked, like a little bit like Malzahar from set 13. And she gets more mana per second from Amp, depending on how many Amp units you have in. So if you have, like you definitely want blue buff, but Lichbane on Yuumi seems like it would be insane because she would just cast over and over again. Radiant blue buff also very good. But because she has damage amp from Strategist and Anima Squad gives also damage amp, she has a ton of damage amp. She just wants AP, which is why Rabadon is very good. And like crit, JG is usually better if you already have a good amount of AP, but because she doesn't, like Rabadon's is particularly good on her. All right, Elise. Nitro doesn't really contribute too much to her. That's the summon trait. Dynamo gives her mana. And she fires 4 lasers at the current target and 4 more split between the 2 nearest enemies, reducing MR flat amount. So some AoE means that the red buff Morello is going to be solid. Shojin with a higher mana cost and just like very generically useful across a lot of different AP damage types. All right, Varus, Exotech Executioner. Exotech items aren't that great for him right now, probably because Varus is just not that strong right now. Hyper Fangs gives some healing, 20 AP. When you deal damage, store 25% of your damage dealt. So this is kind of like Boombots or like Automata, I believe. Hollow Bow grants mana with crit. So I think Hollow Bow is more designed for Varus, but right now it's probably just like the stats are kind of low. I suspect if they buff this and they buff Varus, then Hollow Bow Varus should be what's actually better. And Varus has a stun built into his kit and also chain links 3 closest enemies, which is why Morello and red buff are strong. And he just wants to cast more. And because he already has crit, that's why JG is not good here. Executioner gives him crit. But Guardbreaker is particularly good, especially in this set where there's a lot more shielding units, especially with Vanguard. And he has AoE built into his kit. Guardbreaker is especially good. If you're not sure how Guardbreaker works, after damaging a shield, gain 15% additional damage amp for 3 seconds. So Guardbreaker basically means that Varus should be getting that damage amp a lot. And he already has crit, so he just wants more AP with Rabadons. All right, Annie is a 40 mana, so blue buff is really good for her. Fires mini fireballs and hits 2 nearby enemies. Every 4 casts summon Tibbers, dealing magic damage to enemies within 1 hex. I'm not sure if Tibbers actually has anti-heal as well. I think Tibbers did in the past. If you happen to know, let me know in the comments, please, with a timestamp. And but we do have Morello and red buff here because she splits the fireballs to 2 nearby enemies. I wonder if Tibbers doesn't have anti-heal, if Morello and red buff affect Tibbers as well. So that's another question. But she just wants to cast a lot. Golden Ox gives damage amp. So yeah, actually both Shojin and blue buff work for her. Nashor's is good because it lets her cast attack faster, cast attack faster, and just generic AP items. Lichbane's also here, but Lichbane's probably better on Yuumi because her mana cost is 30 compared to Annie at 40, and Yuumi also has like the amp mana generation. Right, Vex, Divinicore, Executioner already has crit, has some healing. Sends a shadow to all enemies it passes through, dealing magic damage. So has some AoE effect, which is why Morello and red buff are here. Has 30 mana, so blue buff good. Guardbreaker especially good because he's Executioner and does AoE, so will benefit from the shield damage more often. Lichbane also good for the same reason as Yuumi. Generally, blue buff holders will be good with Lichbane as well. All right, Brand, Street Demon Techie, gains AP from these. Keep on forgetting if Street Demon was AP or damage amp. Yeah, it's AP. Street Demon is AP and Anima Squad is damage amp, okay? Throw a paint bomb at the largest group of enemies within 5 hexes, dealing magic damage to them and the nearest 4 enemies. So that's why red buff and Morello are extremely good on Brand because he can just throw a paint bomb at like basically the whole enemy board. Jhin because his mana cost is higher. Crit helps a lot JG with because he gets a lot of AP from his traits. Guardbreaker because anytime you hit AoE, Guardbreaker is going to be better, especially good with when paired with JG to get more value from the glove crit part of the equation. And then Rabadon's gives him damage amp. So Sniper's Focus allows him to reach a lot farther than 5 hexes. So that's really good. Mana Zane, good. And then the Radiant Morello and red buff. Basically, if you're playing Brand, you really want red buff and Morello because you can just guarantee that you're like burning and wounding the whole enemy team. Ziggs, Cyberboss, Strategist. Strategist gives him damage amp. Final Form increases the AoE of the bomb that he throws out. So similar to Brand, Morello red buff are going to be good because if you play Ziggs, you're definitely going to want to make him the cyber boss usually. And so he's going to spread these really well. And Jhin, JG, just all the generic AP stuff. Sniper's Focus can be really good because he's hitting the whole row and column. So that extra range will increase his damage output by a lot. And then last AP unit is Aurora. One thing to note for Aurora, this doesn't really have to do with items. Zac is really great to swap with her trait. First cast swap places with the leftmost champion on your bench because Zac doesn't really need active traits to be useful. If you happen to know if Zac's like blobs that you've bought for Zac get activated if he's on your bench, I would love to know that in the comments with a timestamp. Thank you. Teleports to hit the most enemies in a line. So she has AoE damage as well. So that's why red buff Morello are good for her. So you can see here that for Brand, Ziggs, and Aurora, all of these are going to be good with your red buff and Morello. So I'm just going to update this to include that as well. Makes it easier for us to remember. And then Dynamo gives her more mana. This doesn't really change her itemization that much. These are pretty generic AP. The main thing is that you should note that she's really good at spreading anti-heal and wound. On that note, I'm going to go back and modify this image for all of the AP users that are also good at spreading anti-heals. So that would be Seraphine, Elise, and Varus. So actually a good amount of them. I think Veigar was okay at it. Not that great. Okay. Morgana. Where's Yuumi? Not that great. Annie's okay. Vex is okay. So lots of good AP spreaders of anti-heal. And by the way, I will include a link to my notes, this page here, so you can reference the final results. So while I'm doing that, I should probably also include red buff holders here. So Jhin, no, Draven, okay. Jinx, no. Senna, yes. Although this one was kind of more questionable. MF, yes. Xayah, no. Like, okay. Zeri, no. Aphelios, yes. Mira, okay. And Urgot, oh, just okay. Alright. Alright, so that covers... Oops. That covers all our AD and AP units. And then we'll go to our melee units now. So just to give you a high-level overview, I've split this by melee AD on the left side, which BT is usually going to be better. And for the AP units, Fiddlesticks and Viego, Hodge will usually be better when combined with JG, since you get the extra crit bonus on the Hodge. One thing to note for Shaco is that he scales permanently across the game, gaining 1.5% AD for each kill in the game, which kind of works like Tristana from set 13. So getting him started early is really important. And as far as items go, he, well, from a trait standpoint, he's a Slayer, which gives him healing, and he's going to have a lot of AD, and he will teleport. So the teleportation can make him vulnerable. If your main tank falls down, he will be targeted next, which is why having Edge of Night is really strong for Shaco. And also QSS or QSS. I think usually it's or, like one of these for survivability. And then the IE Hodge combo really allows his scaled AD to get a magnifier with the healing. So usually you want IE Hodge Edge of Night or IE Hodge QSS. And he's also very strong with a bunch of different artifacts and radiant items. So yeah, he's like kind of your assassin of the set, along with Zed. Nidalee, you could usually reroll with Nitro. Is a AP melee, but because, well, she should be categorized under the AP side here. So I'm going to swap this for Hodge JG. Which, by the way, like, it's not a hard rule. If you have BT for any of these AP melee, that's like fine as well. It's just the JG Hodge is particularly strong. From her kit, she deals magic damage to current target and to nearest enemies, +1 per amp, and heals. So, yeah, these are pretty standard melee, AP melee items, so nothing too special about that. Next we have Graves. Graves is an executioner, so does not benefit from IE as much. So you can see IE is pretty mid-tier here. And Golden Ox gives him damage amp, plus the crit. And his attacks fire in a cone. I'm not sure if these projectiles, extra projectiles, same thing with Nidalee, whether they increase the Titan stacks. So if you happen to know the answer to that question, I would appreciate if you could add a comment and with the timestamp. But Graves is really good with a lot of different artifacts and radiant items. But basically, Graves and Rengar here is kind of like set 13 Camille and Smeech. They both share the same trait. They're both executioners, which is basically like ambushers. And so you're itemizing them in a very similar way. So your standard melee and artifact radiant items all apply here. Let's see. Naafiri is an Exotech. His passive already gives him Omnivamp and deals a bunch of AD. So all of the standard stuff. Sterak's is actually particularly strong because his ability scales with AD and he's melee. Sterak's is very good. Repulsor Lantern is strong on him because it gives him HP. And just gives him more survivability. And then Pulse Stabilizer has good stats, executes, and gives him crit. So that would be particularly good with Hodge. Next we have Fiddlesticks, who is a AP user. Fiddlesticks, for 3 seconds, tethers the closest 3 enemies, so has some AoE and shred, as well as heals Fiddlesticks for part of the damage dealt. So Fiddlesticks is also a techie, which gives him AP, and Boombops, which is kind of like Automata. So he's kind of like an interesting scaling. He is at 2 range, so Archangel, like, he can like really clean up the fight, especially because he has built-in healing in his kit. But you want crit. JG Hodge Archangel is very strong. Fiddlesticks is also good with a lot of different artifacts here. Sniper's Focus really increases the range of, and just makes him a lot safer, especially if you're building him with Archangel. Blinding Jewel is very interesting because the magic damage is per second for 3 seconds. And so he can get a lot of instances of the Blinding Jewel, and he already applies Shred. And so if a unit gets to 0 MR, then he gets a lot more mana and can start like chain casting. So that's really good. Seeker's Arm Guard, very good for AP, melee, and Zonias. Plus all of these Radiance. So if you are on like a Jason counter or have like a portable forge, look out for Fiddlesticks when he is strong in the meta. There wasn't really I don't believe 3-cost AP melee unit reroll that was good in set 13, but there's that Fiddlesticks is a really seems like a strong option when he's good. I don't know if he's going to be strong right off the bat, but there will definitely be metas where he's probably going to be in the meta. Zed is a Cypher Slayer. So if you are playing like Shaco, Graves, Naafiri early game, and you're contested or you're hitting from behind, you can always play towards Zed, or frankly, Rengar, Fiddlesticks, Viego. But Zed's going to be your like 4-cost carry. And he also, similar to Shaco, has kind of an assassin-like ability. He is played with Cyphers, which is the cash out trait. So that's gonna usually make his stats weaker. But there will probably be points where he is very strong in the meta. Because he dives in like an assassin, so similar to Shaco, Edge of Night's gonna be really strong on him. And he does have some built-in healing already in Slayer. So like Sterak's and Titans are gonna be particularly good for him. And yeah, his whole thing is like killing the backline quickly, but like the fact that Edge of Night, QSS, Sterak's, and Titans and Hodge, these are all like kind of survivability. He doesn't necessarily need more damage because he's already getting to the backline. His whole win condition is to kill off the enemy carry squishy units before getting to the main tanks. So survivability is usually going to be more important for him than having a lot more damage. Garen, his whole ability is pretty cookie cutter. Like his specialty is really his trait. But he gains a shield, dealing damage in a wave. But Garen, what's interesting with his items here, these are all, your traditional melee items. But what is interesting is that his base stats are actually quite strong. Now keep in mind this is PvE, so this could change. But his 1100 HP and 60 armor MR is like higher than any other unit, like just base in the game at 1-star, which I suspect is why like he actually works all right with basic tank items. So if you find an early Garen in like let's say early stage 4, and you're still on a 2-star tank, or even a 2-star 1-cost tank or 2-star 2-cost tank, you could even just move that straight to Garen, and he could do pretty well for you. So he's a very versatile unit. Viego is an AP melee. Golden Ox Techie. Golden Ox gives him damage amp, Techie gives him AP. He does dive in, jumps to the largest clump, so he puts himself into like kind of risky situations, which is why Edge of Night is like really important for him. I think in the stats it was significantly better than most of the other items. Same with Zhonya. And getting like the crit off of the extra AP from Techie and healing JG Hodge is really good combo. Gunblade is also really valuable since you really do want to make sure he gets healing and survivability. Finally, we have Renekton. Renekton is a Divinicore Bastion, so Bastion will already give him a lot of resistances. And so healing and shielding and survivability, like anytime he heals is even more valuable because that armor MR like boosts the effective HP of whatever amount that he heals. But for the most part, it's like pretty standard melee items. He does burn and wound, so within 2 hexes. So you want to make sure that he's probably same side as your main carry. And I'll talk about positioning in a future video. But this itemization is pretty straightforward as well. All right, so that covers all of the main units. Now looking kind of backwards from this holistically, you can see that this set is incredibly flexible. Like last set, there was only really one blue buff user in Heimer. So there's many more options now. Even Veigar, it seems at least right now, can be hybrid. There's a lot more Morello spreaders here, I think, than previous set. Also, last set, there was only one Rageblade holder that was a 4-cost in Twitch. So the fact that blue buff has multiple carries, Rageblade has multiple carries, and Shojin can be played flexibly across AD and AP, which was, I don't believe, as much the case in set 13. There is only one melee AD 4-cost, or actually melee 4-cost in general. So that's a little bit limited, but I think that was true for set 13 as well. But I think the pattern, looking at this holistically, is that there's just way more flexibility. You could play around 4-cost a lot more, and reroll, you still have a lot of options depending on what's good at any time in the meta. So yeah, this just goes back to understanding if we know how to itemize these units, what makes them strong, what makes them weak. You really do want to focus on slamming your items in the early game. And then you could figure out, like, does it make sense for me to reroll this unit? If I hit a lot of copies, do I have the right augment and setup for it? What is the encounter? Do I have extra items that makes me want to lean more towards reroll? Do we have a more contested situation or less contested situation for 4-costs? Mordog did mention that for set 14, there is one more 4-cost than last set, which also means that you are slightly less likely to be contested for your desired 4-cost. If you add that to the fact that now at blue buff, there's 2 4-cost units, Rageblade 2 4-cost units. Basically, there's 2, and then you could play even flex between 4 AD and AP Shojin users. 4-costs are much more, I would suspect, reliable to play around. Plus, I believe there was a system change to the 4-cost odds, where at level 8, your odds of hitting a 4-cost went up by like a few percentage points. So I suspect playing around 4-cost is going to be significantly more reliable with a higher floor than it was in set 13. And now with this information, to be able to understand how your units are itemized, you can then play more flexibly and have a clear idea of what items to slam in the early game and what paths and lines that you can take as a result of that. So I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you're able to take this meta mindset, modern intelligence equals strategic ignorance idea, and apply it to your game. I hope you can sense like how I am approaching this, where I want to focus more on set 14 ideas that are more agnostic across patches, that are more fundamental to how the unit's traits are structured, rather than micro patch changes where they alter some of the numbers. And hope you can apply some of these learnings to your own learning process as well. So thanks for watching. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, feedback, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And I'll see you in the next one.